Hello, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be reading the 5 longest books on my physical TBR. Now, I've been planning on doing this video for years at this point. It's always been a goal of mine to get the chunkiest books on my shelf together and take care of them all in one video. Obviously, it's taken me a long time to get to this point. I decided to take it easy on myself and read my 5 shortest books on my TBR first. I did that a couple of months ago, and then I was like, okay, now you need to go ahead and do the follow-up to that video and read the 5 longest books that you own. And so in this vlog, I'm going to endeavor to read the 5 longest books on my physical TBR, with the shortest, I want to say, clocking in around 500-ish pages, and the longest one clocking in at over 1,000. So this should be a very interesting adventure. Let me walk you through the 5 books that I'm going to be reading, and then we can get into the vlog portion of this video. It's going to be a long one, so I'm not going to get into any in-depth descriptions right now, but I'm just going to show you what I've got and what we're going to be reading. So first up, we have Secret History by Donna Tartt. I actually got this a year or two ago when I was going to read some dark academia books, and I did actually do that video. I'll link it in the description if you want to see me read dark academia, but this is a book that I just didn't read for that video. I decided to take it easy on myself and to read ones that I thought I would enjoy. This one I didn't think I would enjoy, so it's now this book's time to shine. And for some reason, whenever I ordered this used online, I got a first edition copy of this book, so now I'm the proud owner of a first edition Secret History. Hopefully I will be enjoying it. Spoiler alert, I have read all of these books already, so I know my thoughts and feelings, but I'll try to keep that to myself for now, not spoil the vlog for you. Next up, we have The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. Only thing I know about this is it's sapphic and it has dragons in it, and it is quite the hefty book. I believe this is the second longest book on this list. Next, we have The Queens of Innis Lear by Tessa Gratton. This is another high fantasy. I think honestly all of these books besides The Secret History are fantasies. You know, prayers are welcome. Don't know what this book's about. I just know that I enjoy Tessa Gratton, and I picked this book up because I really enjoyed Strange Grace, so we'll see how this goes. Next, we have The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I think this book has been on my TBR the longest. I believe I purchased a copy of this in 2017. This is a special edition copy. It's got like red sprayed edges. It's really cute, but I paid $40 for this, and will it be worth $40? I don't know. We'll see how that reading experience goes. And then lastly, a book that for some reason kind of appears shorter than all the rest, but is very much the longest, Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This will be my first foray into the Stormlight Archive. I've read the beginning of this book, like 5 times at this point. I've gotten like 5 to 10% in each time that I've attempted to read, but I've always set it down. So this is the vlog where I'm going to finish this book and hopefully carry on with the other Stormlight books in the near future. Not in this vlog, but you know, in the future. Hopefully this goes so well that I'm just like hyped to do that. We shall see. Before we get into the vlog portion of this video, I want to tell you a little bit about today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a meal delivery service that Hayden and I have been using ever since we moved into this house in 2020. We absolutely love HelloFresh because it really cuts down on the amount of time that we have to spend planning what meals we're going to eat in a given week, which is particularly helpful when you are attempting to read 5 incredibly long fantasies in the span of a little bit less than 2 weeks. HelloFresh has meals covered with a weekly selection of 30+ recipes and 70+ convenience items, all delivered to your door. You can effortlessly save time, money, and stress because HelloFresh works with your schedule. Plans are flexible and you can change your meal preferences, update your delivery day, even change your address with just a few taps on the HelloFresh app. The fall season can be really busy, as I can attest to, but weeknights are so much easier with foolproof, step-by-step recipes ready in around 30 minutes or less. Hayden and I typically do the fit and wholesome recipes because it makes it really easy to eat well without sacrificing flavor, so that we're able to maintain our goals and feel good about the food choices that we're making. All right, we're going in.
This is good.
I do like this.
I like the seasoning of the chicken, the flavor of the sauce.
This feels different than like some of the other ones that we've had, which I really like. I feel like lately HelloFresh has really been doing a lot of like different recipes and like kind of switching things up, which I really like. If you want to try HelloFresh out for yourself, go to hellofresh.com and use code chandler.ainsley to get 65% off plus free shipping. Again, go to hellofresh.com, use code chandler.ainsley to get 65% off plus free shipping. Thanks again to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into the vlog portion of the video. Well, Chandler, that is the same outfit that you filmed this introduction in. Correct. I cannot find the footage for The Secret History, which is a damn shame because it was fairly detailed. 2 juicy big clips on this book. Now I'm gonna have to try to remember how I felt about the story and like, you know, exactly what it's about. But you know what? I'm gonna do my best. First off, The Secret History was a book that I fully expected to not enjoy. It is a dark academia story, and I've heard talks of this being one of those books just kind of overhyped. I don't tend to enjoy or gravitate towards pretentious, like literary fiction stories, and this is just like the height of literary fiction pretension, or it was before I read it. And now I can firmly say that this is a goofy ass story. Like, so goofy. I didn't think that that is the takeaway that I would get from this book. It's goofy. Okay, let me try to describe what about this book is goofy. So this book is about our main character, Richard, and he is from California, I believe. He is the son of fairly working class individuals. He didn't grow up super poor or anything, but he did need to get a scholarship to go to college. And he is attending a small liberal arts college in the Northeast, and he is attending with a bunch of like rich people and has never really been in a situation like this before where he has been a fish out of water. And it's pretty evident throughout the story that his goal in life and his main motivating factor, or something that constantly plagues him, is the fact that he is not very wealthy. He has to work unlike all of the other people around him. He has to really consider his appearance compared to everybody else, you know? He has to make sure that like the clothes he's wearing fit in with the people around him. Just things that I think, you know, not everyone is constantly aware of, but I think people who have ever been in a position of poverty definitely struggle with, especially when you're surrounded by people who are much wealthier than yourself. His character is sort of interesting at the beginning of the story. So he's attending this university, and pretty quickly he is enamored with a group of students because they are learning the classics. I think it's Greek specifically that they are all learning, and they are all under the tutelage of one professor, and it's kind of culty, you know what I mean? It's kind of like a little cult. Richard's like, I want to be a part of this, and so he petitions this professor to become a part of it. He was supposed to, I think, become a doctor, but he's like squeamish around blood and just like not into it, so he ends up joining this group of people, being sort of an outsider, sort of an onlooker, sort of the narrator, but also sort of being a part of what is going on. And what is going on is quite interesting, kind of, but kind of goofy at the same time. This group of people, it's like twins, 2 random white guys, I believe, and then 1 white guy who is murdered. And we know at the beginning of the story he's murdered. His name is Bunny, and he is a character who is just so totally unlikable and kind of mirrors Richard in some ways. He comes from a fairly wealthy family, but he's constantly asking people around him for money and constantly just like freeloading off of his friends. He makes a lot of poor commentary that is in poor taste and that is oftentimes racist and homophobic. Someone that they keep around and you're just not entirely sure why they keep him around. And he eventually gets murdered. But a lot of things happen before this. A lot of things happen to lead to Bunny's murder, and you're trying to figure out which of them did it, if they were all kind of in cahoots, and again, like what led to this. It's not necessarily a whodunit, but more of like a why. Why was this done? And there are some other deaths and murders, shall we say, that take place between the beginning of the story and then Bunny dying. And I really expected this to be pretentious and self-important, and I'm not saying that it wasn't, but I think the overall tone and the overall execution of this just was really goofy and satirical to me. And I'm not sure that that was the author's intention, but that's definitely how it came across. And I think that maybe helped me enjoy the story more than I would have otherwise. So I wish I could put into words exactly what about the story reads as goofy. I think maybe it's because the actions of the students seem to come from basically nowhere. There's no justification for the reason that they behave in the way that they do, the kind of silly mischief, I guess you could say, that they get up to because of the sort of like classics philosophical approaches that they take to life. Like, it just, none of it really has justification, and so it's interesting seeing these rich kids like try to justify their behavior. It was funny to me. It was funny to me. It wasn't like appalling necessarily. I mean, I guess it is appalling for sure, but if anything, just the way it read, it was a little silly. I think this was also not helped by the fact that our audiobook narrator was the author, who was from Mississippi, not from California or the Northeast, and so hearing her like Mississippi accent trying to narrate for Richard was definitely an interesting experience. It was just a weird book. It's just a weird book. I understand in some ways why people like this, because I do think it pokes fun at the self-importance of academia a little bit. It does have kind of a fun vibe to it. Definitely feels a product of its time as well. Like, there's definitely references to like the 80s and 90s within the book that I wasn't expecting, so I do think that helped in my enjoyment as well, because the 80s is like one of my favorite times. I think this book was published in like 93 or 94 or something like that, but one can assume that it was like set in the late 80s. I don't know. It's just a very interesting story overall, an interesting tale, one that I expected to totally hate, but one that I can actually sort of appreciate. And I feel like if this is supposed to be read through a satirical lens, I can understand why it's so interesting that dark academia has gone in the direction that it's gone, which is a little bit self-important, which is a little bit self-serious, whereas I don't think this book really is. I think this book is supposed to be like pointing fun and poking fun at academia and like the people who engage with these ideas and ideas of like wealth and class and stuff. I don't know if any of this is making sense. It was a weird book. I did not hate it. I'm surprised that I did not hate it. I will likely be keeping my copy because I have a first edition copy randomly. This is definitely not the worst book that I've read for this video, which surprises the hell out of me. I certainly thought that it would be the worst book that I would read for this video. I think now at this point, I probably will go back and kind of see if I am spot on with my like, this book is satirical sort of thing, or if I am just misreading this book altogether. But regardless, it was not too bad of a time. Moving on. A smile is never a good thing in these circumstances, in these situations. I decided to DNF The Queens of Innis Lear by Tessa Gratton. And I'm disappointed in myself in this because I picked up this book in the first place because I had read Strange Grace by Tessa Gratton and really enjoyed it. So I assumed, in what I thought was a logical sense, that I would enjoy an adult novel by this author. My main complaint when I read Strange Grace was that it was fantastic. I just wanted it to go farther, and I felt like it would be more well suited for an adult setting. So I was like, sure, let me pick up a book by this author that is in an adult setting. I would prefer to not only watch paint dry, but to eat paint than finish this book, sadly. This book is a take on the story of King Lear, or is King Lear a play? I'm not sure. It's Shakespeare, and I just know that I haven't fucking read it. This story follows 3 sisters who are the daughters of the king, and one of them will be the Queen of Innis Lear. We don't know which one, and we don't really know how this circumstance is going to happen, despite the fact that we know a lot about like the stars and how the stars have aligned to like foretell who shall be given certain circumstances. I don't know. There's a lot of different fucking magic systems in this world, right? My issue with the story, and the reason that I DNF'd it, was that nothing was happening and it was way too flowery. Now, that was something I actually really enjoyed about Strange Grace by Tessa Gratton. I appreciated the lyricism, I appreciated how atmospheric it felt, but it was also coupled with a plot line that I felt was succinct. That story was not very long. I think it was around 350 pages. And even though it was lyrical, it made sense and we were getting somewhere. 30% into this book, after 3 hours of physical listening to this book, I couldn't do it anymore because the story was leading us nowhere. I think a major pitfall of the story as well was the fact that it was told from multiple points of view. I understand that this is a common tactic in adult fantasy. I don't think it's necessarily the wrong one. However, it's very clear from the start of the story that one of our protagonists, one of the queens, or like future queens perhaps, was going to be the most important. She is the one that we care the most about. And yet we're given these kind of throwaway plot lines or kind of throwaway stories for the 2 elder sisters. We've got War Sister and we've got Baby Making Sister. And then we've got the other one who has some complexity to her, the youngest one. The first 2, it's like their points of view, wow, they only exist for one purpose. Like I said, either to warmonger or to make babies. Those are the only 2 personality traits they have. That and the fact that they are weirdly symbiotically linked. They decide that they want to be queens together, and that even though they're married, they want to get rid of their husband so they can rule together. It's an interesting idea. I can respect it, but their plot lines were interesting enough to carry their POVs for sure. And then the part that I stopped at was a POV that I didn't even really understand. It might have been like a knight or somebody like that, but it was a male character who literally had no impact on the story whatsoever and or wasn't carrying the plotline along in any way. Just at a loss, I guess, with the story. There were a couple of people whose opinions I really respect on the Goodreads page. I was surprised that really enjoyed this book, but the vast majority of my friends who have attempted to read this have DNF'd it at like 10%. After reading or attempting to read this book, I definitely understand. It's not a terrible book. I'm sure if I were in maybe the right headspace for this, or if I really wanted to commit time to listening to this book for 25 hours, like maybe something good could come out of it, maybe good lessons would be learned. But since I don't care about the source material very much, I don't know anything about King Lear as a play or as a work, and I think this is just not the kind of retelling that works for me. I feel confident in my DNF, which feels bad when you're doing a video where you're reading like the longest books on your TBR, but you know what? I think I was gonna say there's some sort of like profound lesson to be learned here about like, you know, don't waste your time. I don't think that's profound. I think that's just common sense, and I think that that's something that we should all do. However, I'm going to endeavor to finish the next 3 books. I'm going to vlog that experience, and you will be along for that ride with me. 1 DNF out of 5 ain't bad, but the next 3 we're gonna finish in their entirety. Energy out into the world, and hopefully I'm not jinxing myself. All right, Kavoth cloth sweatshirt, I'm gonna call him sweatshirt, might be extremely valid. He also might be extremely annoying. I'm not entirely decided, but I am like 20-30% into The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and can I say, some good fucking food. I am enjoying this book. What? Who thought it? Who would have thunk I would have enjoyed a fantasy book? Who would have thought it would be this one? Certainly not I, but I'm having a fantastic time. I plugged this in, and I don't know, something about the idea of like a plotting story about just one person's life doesn't really excite me. It's not something that I typically look for in fantasy. Not that I really look for anything in fantasy because I don't pick up fantasy, but I don't feel like that's typically what I'm drawn to. I feel like I am typically going for like a multi-POV story, and yet somehow this one just instantly drew me in. I think part of it's because the audiobook listening experience has been so easy and so seamless, but I think a bigger part of it is that this story knows what it's doing. It's taking me on a journey and a ride, and I'm not so confused by insane world building and info dumping. I think that's what I am so impressed by with this story. It tells the tale of our dear sweatshirt, right? At the beginning of the story, we know that he is now the owner of an inn, and he has a little friend friend, who I will be honest, there's some sort of like gay tension in my opinion between him and his little friend who like works with him at the inn. And he's just trying to keep low, kind of lay low. We know that he has a past, or we kind of get the idea that he might have some sort of sordid past. He has gone by many names. And this guy comes to his inn and is like, hey, I know who you are. I want to record your story. And after a little bit of convincing, he's like, you know what? Sure. And then we're off to the races, and we are getting the story of this boy, how he went from basically like a traveling theater person with his family, then I guess how he becomes the man that he is, how he learns Name of the Wind. There's magic, like part of the story is him learning a little bit of magic. I think that's going to become a bigger part of the story as I carry on and listen to kind of his journey. I'm liking it, and I'm shocked and I'm shook and I'm shaken, but I am genuinely enjoying this book. So thank God, frankly, because I don't really have that much time to listen to this one, nor do I have very much time to listen to any of these audiobooks. However, I'm not tempted to put this one down. I actually plugged it in and started listening to it as I was assembling some outdoor patio furniture, because I was like, I don't want to be stuck indoors listening to these audiobooks for 3 days straight, so let me, build some patio furniture. And I was just hooked. I was gripped. I ignored my aching fingers as I was doing this task because I was like, this audiobook is just so damn good. So far, so good. I've heard that he gets a little insufferable. I've heard that our main character is like a perfect angel that everybody seems to love, and it's like, no one's that perfect. I get it. But I don't really care because I'm having a good time, and I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna get to the 50% mark, and then I will update you on, I was gonna say my final thoughts. It won't be my final thoughts, but like my midway thoughts and feelings. I'll definitely get midway. All right, so I've managed to get 50% into The Name of the Wind, and I'm so sorry. I have not edited that first clip for this book yet, but I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that it had nothing of substance to it, because I think I was just so overwhelmed with my excitement that I was enjoying this book. I'm going to try to detail what I'm enjoying about the book, kind of talk about the plot without spoiling it. Now, that's not to say there won't be spoilers later on. I think I told you at the beginning of this video there will be spoilers for some of these books, but I think for this one I'm going to try to avoid it, and I feel like that shouldn't be too terribly challenging. If you're someone who thinks everything is a spoiler, this might be a spoiler, but we're gonna get into it, okay? So our main man Sweatshirt is traveling around with his family, and pretty early on in the book, he comes into contact with this guy, and I don't exactly know what this guy's purpose or job is. I can't exactly remember, but I think a lot of people consider him to be like some sort of charlatan, but he has some magic to him, and he ends up training our guy Sweatshirt as he travels from town to town with Sweatshirt and his family. In this process, again, he's like learning a lot, and he's figuring out, and the people around him are figuring out that he's a bit of a genius. So by the age of 12, he knows more than many full-grown men on magic and this other like science-y, mathy bullshit. I mean, I guess that's not really bullshit. It's real stuff, right? But he is very much the chosen one, you know what I mean? Like, very much everybody loves him. He's great, fantastic. Things can't be perfect for him forever, and a series of events, a series of circumstances lead him to unfortunately separate from his family, and he is on this quest to learn all that he can about is it sympathetic arts? I'm not entirely sure, but that's like magic, I guess, or a little bit of magic. So he decides that he's going to go to university. I want to say he's like 15 at the time that he shows up, and he petitions the like admissions to let him in and to let him not pay any tuition because he is flat broke and doesn't have a way to pay for himself. And the parts that I've been reading lately are kind of all of his exploits and all of the things that he gets up to at this university, and it's pretty entertaining. I think if you're someone who likes books with a magical school setting, I think this is a book that you might perhaps enjoy. I think something that I am struck by is the fact that there are definitely elements in the story that I think are outlandish and perhaps problematic. I think for me and for many people, the most glaringly obvious issue is the way that women are treated and portrayed in these books. I mean, I haven't read any beyond this first book, but it is pretty obvious that none of the women really have a lot of agency or have a lot of power within the story. Granted, it is told from the point of view of a young kid, I guess, a boy specifically. So I guess one could argue that that is why the women are not portrayed as like, I don't know, full-fledged characters with no degree of personality beyond just like an archetype of mother or someone that our main character could potentially have relations with. It's just, it's not my favorite. And there's definitely other like issues at hand that I'm sure a lot of other people on Goodreads have like gone into depth about, but I think I'm struck by the fact that I just kind of don't care. I mean, I do care, right? Like, I do think that this book wasn't written that long ago, and I think these problems could have been worked out in the editing process. However, I am just so entranced in the story that at this point I'm not like rolling my eyes at every turn. I think maybe I am just like so in the mindset of our main character that I'm like, you know what, I'm having a good time, which feels weird. It feels weird to like a book with issues, and also it feels strange to be be enjoying an adult fantasy novel. But I'm not mad at it. I'm really not mad at it at all. I'm curious to see where the story goes, and I'm actually curious to move beyond this like schooling phase of this young kid's life, but I'm curious to see if this book will do that, since I could be wrong here, but the way that the story is set up at the beginning of the book, we have an adult sweatshirt basically telling the chronicler, the guy that is kind of recording the story, he tells him, I'll give you 3 days, or the chronicler says he'll have 3 days to record the story, and I'm assuming each book, of which I'm assuming there should be 3, each book will be chronicling a different part of Sweatshirt's life. I could be wrong here. I don't know how long this series is supposed to be. I just know that there's, I think, 2 books out, and the 3rd one is kind of nowhere to be seen. So it feels, I guess, bad to be invested in the story when who knows what will become of it, but I am excited, I guess, to move beyond what we've got. So I'm enjoying the side characters, and I'm enjoying Sweatshirt as character as well. Like, I like the friends he has. It feels very familiar, if you will. You know what I mean? Like, it's giving me magical school vibes, familiar magical school vibes, and I think, like, if you're looking for that, you know, you might find it here in an adult setting, which is super fun. And I do actually like the professors and the kind of like elders that Sweatshirt comes into contact with, because they definitely like help put him in his place, because he kind of needs that at times. Anyway, I'm going to continue reading. I think I'll probably just update you once I'm finished with this book, because I don't really want to give you spoilers, but so far I would say that I kind of feel like page length sometimes, if the story's written correctly, can be something that can aid in a story feeling real, and I think it can make for a story that you are super invested in, and I hope that that carries on the farther we read. Obviously, we had one dud in the Queens of Innis, Lear, but I didn't totally hate The Secret History. This one I'm really enjoying, and I kind of think The Priory of the Orange Tree and The Way of Kings are gonna rock. Spoiler alert, I'm like 15-20% into The Way of Kings. I've gotten 15 to 20% into The Way of Kings like 5 times at this point, and I do like that book, so I'm excited to finish that one off. So anyway, I am going to go to sleep, read some more of this, and then go to sleep, and I will update you tomorrow when I am finished with this book. The Tale of Sweatshirt is completed. Maybe I will stop wearing gray sweatshirts in these clips. Probably not, but you know. Let's talk about the name of the wind. I love how in the last clip I said, I'm so excited for him to get out of university and for things to move on. He does not get out of university. That is what the story is. He is in university the entire time for the most part. But I actually didn't hate it, because some other like exciting plot point juicy things do happen to make this story interesting and to kind of keep you motivated to read. Now I'm struggling with how far I want to go in depth about the story. I feel like I can just leave this one as is without spoiling it, but I will say I'm surprised at how well loved the story is. Not because I didn't enjoy it, because I truly did, but it just feels so wildly different from any other fantasy book that I've read. Sure, there are some familiar tropes, sure there are some things that like feel very traditional fantasy, but I feel like because of the way this book is written and because of the time span that it covers, which is basically this kid's adolescence, it surprises me that this is a book, like this is a start of a series that people are like, oh yeah, I've got to read the next one. I don't know, it just like isn't what I was expecting, because it's not particularly complex. Granted, there are a lot of like questions raised as the story continues, kind of about the magic system and about like this group of people that, like I said, not gonna spoil it here, but overall the story just has a certain simplicity that I just like wasn't expecting, and I actually found really charming. I think the additional page length in this book really did lend itself to getting you to kind of care about our main character. He's a main character that I know for sure is not going to work for everyone, which I definitely understand, but I do think those additional pages and the fact that this book is long is not a mark against it. I feel like I'm really understanding the richness and the complexity of this man's life, or I guess boy's life at this point. He's an adult person now, but like we're getting the flashbacks of his adolescence. I don't know, I had a good time with it. I don't know what else to say besides this is a 4-star read. Like, who would have thunk, honestly? Not I. Of all of the books that I'm reading for this video, I'm glad that this is the one that I really enjoyed. I mean, I say that as if I'm not about to read 2 other books that I'm hopefully going to really enjoy, but this one, I remember spending like $40 on like a semi-special edition of this book. Maybe it was like the 10-year anniversary or something like that. You know what? That kind of checks out. Maybe it was a 10-year anniversary of the book. I didn't realize this shit was written in 2007 or published in 2007. Honestly, rest in peace to all the people who are like excited to read this book or are waiting for that 3rd book. The last book in the series, the 2nd book, was published in 2011. 3rd book, nowhere in sight. Regardless, kind of a long time to wait for a story. However, this was good. Had a good time. Sorry, I couldn't be more descriptive, but I'm also just not a very descriptive gal. You might be asking yourself, what makes this a 4-star rather than a 5-star read? I think for me, like I said, simplicity was something I appreciated, though I do wish there had been, I don't know, a couple of additional conflicts, or we had gotten more information on this group of people that is kind of coming after our man Sweatshirt. I think that would have made it something that could have ended on like a better cliffhanger. I feel like I would have been like, oh shit, I gotta read the second book. And as this book ends, I just didn't really feel that way. I mean, I might still read the other books in the series, especially if that third one ever comes out. But right now, as it stands, I feel like this is a 4-star, not a 5-star read, just because of that reason. It just was lacking a little something that I can't really put my finger on, but it was a really fun time. And actually, yeah, I don't regret reading this book at all. Like, this was fantastic. I am kind of sad that I didn't read this earlier. Anyway, lessons learned. Lessons learned. Now let's go ahead and read something different. Let's see if we can get another 4 or 5-star read here. Priory of the Orange Tree is what we're gonna do next, which is the second most long book. That doesn't make any sense. Second longest book that I own. A book about dragons not being interesting was definitely not on my list of things that I expected to happen in 2022. However, I read The Priory of the Orange Tree yesterday, and I finished a little bit of it today. I don't even really know where to begin with this one, okay? This was not terrible. It was not the worst book I've ever read. I could definitely tell that a lot of like care was taken in crafting this story. It seems like the author was really like passionate about what she was writing, which is good. Important, I suppose. But that's about all the good I can say about this book. This is a multi-POV story about 2 different lands from the East and the West. The East reveres dragons and, you know, kind of treats them not as deities necessarily, but like definitely thinks that dragons are really an important part of their culture, and one of the characters that we read from their point of view is training to become a dragon rider, and she does, you know, eventually accomplish that goal pretty early on actually in the book. In the West, they don't like dragons at all. They think of them as sort of like evil creatures. And we have our Queen Sovereign, who is basically, I don't want to say being taken care of, but she is, I guess, guarded in a way by this character named Iad, who we learn a lot about through the story because she is one of the narrators. So we have Tane, we have Iad, you know, East versus West, and then we also have 2 male narrators throughout the story as well, who have connections with both the East and the West. We have this guy named Nicholas, and he is an older gentleman who is kind of, I don't want to say exiled, but he leaves his home country to live in the East, and he ends up taking in a prisoner at the beginning of the story, kind of, not really a prisoner, a guy who's like been asked to leave his own country, and he kind of gets stranded, and his name is Lord Loth. I struggled with this book because I felt like as rich as the world was, as much as I could tell that this author really knew what she was trying to do, I don't think the way that this book was formatted worked for me at all. First off, the info dumping in this book is absolutely out of this world, especially at the very beginning of the story. The first like 200 pages or like, I don't know, 30% of the book was really, really challenging for me to get through, and I think part of that was that the book that I read prior to this was a book that I felt like wasn't something that had a lot of info dumping. It wasn't a book that I was sitting there struggling to remember the names of characters. I just wasn't overwhelmed. I was having a really seamless reading experience, and plugging this in and reading the book physically at the same time didn't really help very much. I felt very overwhelmed going into this book, and it wasn't a good overwhelm. It wasn't like, oh, I really want to learn more about everything. I did initially very much care about Tane's story, but I didn't really care about the West. I really didn't care about any of the other characters in general, even some of the other characters in the East. I was just like here for the dragons for the most part, right? It was giving me kind of Manon in Throne of Glass series kind of vibes. Initially the info dumping really, had me. And after, that slog through the first 30% of the book or so, I was able to become more connected with the story as a whole and connected a little bit more with the characters. But then I got slapped with the pacing issue. The pacing through the story is just so all over the place. I really felt like the story didn't need to be one book. I felt like it could have been broken up into multiple stories. Things that felt like really crammed and packed together could have been expanded upon. The things that felt like they were slow plotting maybe could have been reformatted in a way that would have made the book feel more pleasant to listen to. And then the nail in the coffin for me, sadly, were the characters, which is such a bummer because I went from a single POV story where I was comfortable and having a good time, and I was ready to jump into a multiple POV story and get invested in different characters and have a little bit more excitement. Here's the thing. I liked Name of the Wind. It was a really fun book to read. I liked listening to a single POV fantasy story, which I wasn't expecting. However, I wanted a little bit more excitement. That book was not exactly thrilling. This book could have been thrilling, but it wasn't because it was one book rather than a couple of books. And then also the characters. I don't know what it was. I could not connect with really any of these characters, which is such a bummer because this was peddled as this sapphic story. It's a slow burn. You're going to really grow to care about these characters. And I just didn't care about any of them. Kind of cared about Iad as the story kind of carried on because she was interesting. And I feel like she had the most complex motivations of all of the characters in the story. But even that was not enough to overcome the fact that the other POVs in the story were just not it. I don't know, it just was not my favorite, and I feel weird not enjoying this book and really enjoying The Name of the Wind. Granted, they're entirely different stories, but I was really excited for this sapphic feminist fantasy novel, especially since so many of my friends seemed to like it, and I just really did not connect with the story at all. The ending too was a total letdown could have been solved by this being more than one book. I do apologize though for not updating you as I read this book and not sharing more of my in-depth thoughts and feelings along the way. I was just in kind of a weird mindset yesterday. I am still obviously like working through my grief, and this week has been kind of hard for me in that regard. So I'm like trying to put my all into this video, but I'm also trying to like respect my own feelings and emotions. And I feel like had I updated you at the 50% mark of this book, it would have been trash. It would have been a bad update. Not that this was like the best ever, but this for me was like a 2.5 star read. It sucks because again, I know how much care and craft went into this, and I don't think it's like the worst story ever, but there just really wasn't anything keeping me invested. I didn't care about the plot. I didn't care about the characters. I felt like the pacing was off. Like it just wasn't a story for me, which sucks. I don't know if I'm gonna unhaul this immediately or anything, but I will say I think the page length worked against this book, and I think it's interesting seeing how the page length either works for or against a novel as you continue to read. I feel like The Name of the Wind, that one was long, but it helped you get invested in the character's journey. And in this book, unfortunately, I feel like the page length hindered it in a way because this book was allowed to get this long. I wish a publisher would have just sat down with the author and said, hey, I think this should be multiple books. Let's like break this up. And I think having the individual books be like shorter, but also expanding upon certain parts and like recrafting certain things, I think it would have made for a more fulfilling story, and hopefully would have had a more satisfying climax. Let's go ahead and get into The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I'm actually 30% in, and you know what? We're just gonna talk about it now. Do I have anything prepped for this? No, I don't. But I've been listening to this for a good portion of today. It's like 2 p.m. I finished Priory earlier in the day, and then I immediately jumped into this one. And I think I told you earlier that I already started with The Way of Kings, but I really think this is gonna be my favorite of all of the books. I just have this feeling. I really do. It's a good book, and it is doing everything that I enjoy and balancing things well. It's like all of the complaints that I had about other books. This one is answering those complaints and saying, here you go. Here's some food. Here's some good food. Even better food than The Name of the Wind. Okay, so again, there are so many characters already introduced in this book, and I want to be able to go in depth this one because I don't know for sure, but I would assume that if you're watching this video, you are probably most invested in my feelings on The Way of Kings, which is valid. It's a book that I have, I would say, the most attachment to, in the sense that like I really want to enjoy it and I really want to share my thoughts and feelings. I left a large portion of this video to be able to talk about this book. Where to begin with this book? I actually just tried to explain Kaladin and Kaladin's role within the story, but I realized I kind of have to talk about the world before I even begin to get into the characters and also how I'm feeling about them. So in this world, there are a few different countries. I think they're all kind of like on one contiguous continent, though I could be wrong. I have not referenced the map since starting this book. Most characters in this book are from the country Alethkar. Is it Alethkar? Alethkar? Most of the people in this book are Alethi, and the Alethi people have had a bit of like turmoil, I suppose you could say, in their country as of late. Their king was unfortunately murdered at the hands of a Parshendi warrior. We'll get into the Parshendi later, but he was unfortunately murdered, and his son is now king, and his son is insistent that they fight back against the Parshendi people and kind of get revenge or avenge his father's death. Is this the smartest thing ever? No, it's not, and that's something that we learn pretty quickly in this story. And the way that the king accomplishes this act of revenge is by getting all of the kind of like regional leaders of his country together. He sends them all kind of like separately out into the Shattered Plains to fight the Parshendi, who are a different race of people, but these leaders from Alethkar end up kind of forming war bands and going out into the Shattered Plains to fight the Parshendi people. So that's the sort of like general conflict and or setup of the story. I say setup, I mean things are kind of being unveiled as the story continues on. It's not like this was all thrown at us at the beginning, but that's kind of like the general crux of the story. And now I can tell you the characters who play into this. So first off, we have the Bridgemen. In the Shattered Plains, the place where the Alethi warriors, I guess you could say, are trying to fight the Parshendi, we have these guys called bridge runners. So since they're plains, there's a lot of like plateaus, and there's big crevices between these plateaus. They need bridges to be able to cross between the other places. The issue is that if they try to carry the bridges themselves or to build these bridges themselves, they will be killed before they can even like try to fight the Parshendi. So they enlist the help, I guess, not really enlist the help. They enslave people to carry these bridges, to assemble the bridges, and so they will be the people who will quickly die by arrow fire, and I guess die by arrow fire, you know, to help out their fellow Alethi people. And one of our main characters, Kaladin, is one of these bridge runners. At the beginning of the story, we follow Kaladin, and he is in kind of a bad place. We know that he was a leader at one point, and then he unfortunately was sold into slavery. And I don't really remember the context of that, or if we are supposed to know the context of that yet and like why exactly that happened, but he does end up becoming sold to someone, and now he is a bridge runner. But he doesn't want the people who are bridge running with him in his like particular group of people. He doesn't want everybody to die. Like that is what typically happens, is like bridge runners have a very short lifespan, but Kaladin, since he has experience with war, he wants to be able to get creative and avoid this, I guess, in essence. And that's kind of where I'm at with Kaladin's story right now. Kaladin is one of our main characters, and I think he is like the most main of the main characters at this point. He's also my least favorite character at this point. I know some people like really ride hard for Kaladin, but at this point he is the character that I feel like I care the least about, because I feel like his motivations are not complex and interesting enough for me. Then let's talk about, I'm only going to talk about 2 other characters. There are like a bunch in the story, but the ones that we have spent the most time with, we shall talk about next. First up, I guess we can talk about Dalinar, because he has a lot of ties to the Shattered Plains. He is the brother of the old king, and he is kind of an advisor in some ways to his brother's son, or his nephew, I guess you could say. And Dalinar has 2 sons of his own, who he's also having to like keep in check, because they are kind of questioning Dalinar's motivations and or the way that he interacts with the king. It's not that no one likes the king. He's not a terrible guy. He's just not a very good leader. He's not good at kind of like uniting his people, and the country in general is very fractured because he's been sending these people out to go fight on behalf of him for kind of no reason. I mean, like, yeah, sure, I guess technically they killed your daddy, but at the same time, get over it. Like, your country's kind of failing at this point because of you and your idiocy. So Dalinar is there to kind of act as the voice of reason to the king, and he is a very interesting character. I actually just got done listening to one of his flashbacks or whatever. Dalinar is a very complex character. He feels a lot of guilt, I would say, for brother's death. He feels like he should have been there protecting him. He also feels like he needs to help unite the country because his nephew is not doing a very good job at it, and he's also struggling because his brother left behind words for him, and now he is reading from this book that his brother was reading at the end of his life that kind of made him a little bit crazy, or at least people thought he was crazy. And I think maybe the book is causing the flashbacks and like the weird visions that he is having. Maybe it's not, but he's having very interesting visions, and I'm very curious to find out what it all means. But Dalinar's character is one that initially I'm drawn to because it seems like he has a lot of competing interests going on. He has a lot of different motivations. He's just not as whiny as Kaladin. Like, I'll be honest with you, I'm enjoying his character much more. And then I guess we can talk about like the last main character that I've been introduced to thus far, and that would be Shallan. Shallan is a character that at the beginning of the story I was instantly drawn to because she is coming to, I want to say like the capital city or something of Alethkar, and is trying to be trained by the like heretic sister, I guess you could say, of the king. And this woman doesn't really want very much to do with Shallan. She's like, I just don't think you're experienced enough. Like, I don't know about all that. I'm not really sure about taking you on, but Shallan does everything in her power to become an apprentice and to like become trained by this woman. And the whole reason she's doing this is because her dad is kind of in a bad way in a sense, and I think he's in ruin. I think they don't have money or something to that effect, and she needs to secure herself a really good marriage to save her family. And the way to do this is to become trained and to become like really intelligent, and she would become like an asset, I guess, to whoever she married. Like, she'd get a very advantageous marriage, I guess, if she becomes trained by this woman. And after much grumbling on the part of Yasna, who is the person who is going to train Shallan, she does end up kind of like securing her spot in a sense. And we haven't really revisited Shallan's point of view. I think I'm in a part of the book where Shallan doesn't have a POV, which is fine. But I'm interested in her character so far because I like her speech. I feel like she is pretty bold and she is kind of willing to give people a little bit of attitude, where some of the other characters so far just haven't really had that that spark. I don't know, that zest for life that I really feel like Shallan has. And I definitely feel like there's more to her story. I did ask Hayden, like, is there more to Shallan's story? Like, am I missing something? And he's like, I don't think you've gotten there yet, but her story is much more interesting than you initially believe, even though it is like kind of an interesting one. So I'm curious to see what her tutelage under Yasna looks like. And yeah, overall, I'm having a good time. As you can tell, I kind of know what the fuck's going on in this book, and I am actually invested in the story. I really want to know more about the Parshendi people. I am pretty sure, I think I asked Hayden, I'm not sure if it's in this book or a different book, we are going to get a POV from a Parshendi character, which should be interesting. Really curious. There's so much here to explore, and there's so much I want to know. Which is good. I mean, that's a good sign for a book. Something that I didn't really talk about before was, I guess, like the magic system here and sort of fuels this society. There's a lot of different kind of magic afoot, and there's a lot of different things in this world, which I find fascinating and I want to learn more about, and I'm kind of ignorant to some of it, so like forgive me for that. But at the beginning of the story we do get some insight into what this world looked like hundreds of years ago, and there were these Knights Radiant, I guess you could say. They had shard blades and shard plates, I believe. Basically these magical blades that allowed them to easily conquer different people and conquer different lands. But they made a deal with someone to give them these powers. Like, I guess they were like ordinary human people, sort of, but they had powers bestowed upon them and kind of like in their blades and shields. And in this deal, it's like they could fight for however many years, but then they would have to go back to hell, essentially, as like penance or whatever, or repayment, I guess, for these powers that they were bestowed upon. But in the beginning of the book, they kind of leave their shard plates and shard blades aside, and then they just like don't go back to hell, is kind of what I'm getting from it. I'm sure there will be kind of more details about this later on. I actually don't even know what it's called, the place that they go. It's not hell, but it's just a not so fun place, I'm assuming. And we know that these shard blades and shard plates have been left behind because the like most fearsome warriors or whatever in this society have them, you know, the Alethi people specifically. Although I'm gonna assume the Parshendi probably have them too. I'm not entirely sure. Okay, I feel like I have detailed the plot pretty well and kind of given you some of my thoughts and feelings. Overall, like, I'm just having a good time with this book. I'm wanting to know what's gonna happen next. I am invested in this world, and I definitely will be carrying on with the series. I mean, I have the other books on my shelf. I mean, you can see my last remaining vestiges of my physical TBR on these two shelves right here, but 3 of those books are Brandon Sanderson books, and I'm gonna have to get through those sometime this year. But I'm vibing, I'm having a good time, and I feel like this is definitely the high note that I need to end this video on, though it has been such an interesting experience so far. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but yeah, it wasn't what I was expecting. The books that I expected to hate, I am not, and then the books that I expected to really enjoy, I have not. So, you know, all over the place. I am intending to finish this book, I would say tomorrow morning. I'm trying not to like push myself too hard with finishing it today. I could, but I would rather like, you know, luxuriate and kind of enjoy the story. So once I get to like the 50 or 70% mark, I will keep you posted on my thoughts and feelings. Hopefully it won't be as like in-depth as this stupid clip, but it's a good time. Do you like The Way of Kings? I do. You like that transition? I'm like 50% in at this point, which, you know, living, laughing, loving, it's definitely not going as quickly as I wanted it to, but I think it's because I keep pausing to like look things up and to just clarify, which I think is a good thing, right? Like, I want to be fully invested and fully understand this story. And before going into it, Hayden did tell me that like this one is kind of slow moving, it's harder to get into, and it's a book that you're thrown a lot of things, like not in an info dumpy sense, but you're just thrown so many different new concepts to, I guess, try to parse through and understand, that if you don't like stop and try to process it every once in a while, you're going to be kind of lost, in my opinion, and in Hayden's opinion. And I think he was right, for sure. So I've been stopping to like look up what the fuck a soul caster is, and just the details, I guess, of this system and this magic, and there's just so much going on, but I'm still having a good time with it. Since we last spoke, Kaladin and his Bridge 4 besties are figuring out ways to make bridge carrying an endeavor where they don't all get murdered, and I think I might have mentioned that in the last clip, but that's kind of what has been happening. Unfortunately, though, while this endeavor did work and like none of the Bridge 4 people have died since he tried to implement this approach, shall we say, I think it caused the actual Alethi soldiers to die. Like, it messed up the flow of things, and the bridgemen carrying the other bridges definitely died, and I think it just kind of like messed up the plan of attack. Yeah, the Parshendi definitely got him good during that sesh, and I think that Kaladin's gonna be punished, which is not ideal. We're also learning more about Kaladin's backstory the longer the story goes on. I will say I did get spoiled a little bit whenever I was looking up Kaladin and just trying to like understand more about him. I think I said in general that the Alethi people have dark hair and light eyes. That's only the ruling class people, I guess you could say. Like, the lighter your eyes, the more powerful, I guess, you are. And if you have dark eyes, then you are kind of more of the working class. And so Kaladin has really dark brown eyes. He's part of the working class, even though he was like training to be a doctor. I guess doctors are not really a big deal. I don't know. But that's kind of where Kaladin's story is. We also got a little bit more of Dalinar, and we kind of start to understand more about what's happening to him, kind of. He's having these visions, he's having these flashbacks almost of a time a while ago. My cats are playing in the background, and it's so cute. Okay, but we're understanding more about him in the present day. He is, he kind of has a thing for his brother's wife, or brother's widow, which, scandalous. The drama, I love the intrigue there. He said like multiple times in his like internal dialogue, kind of, it's third person, but like we kind of get there, you know, internal dialogue, because it's, I think, omniscient. Dalinar definitely has a thing for this woman. He thinks she's the most beautiful woman ever, and he's like, I should be thinking about my wife who's deceased, but like, this woman is just so beautiful. And she's actually the one who reads to Dalinar, not all of the time, but there's like a scene where she reads to him, I guess, and that might not sound like that big of a deal, but in this world, men can neither read nor write, so if they want to get knowledge from books, they have to have women help them out, and you know what? I kind of like that. I guess I don't like the implication that like reading is a feminine pursuit, but I also just think it's funny that like the world's knowledge is not really entrusted in men. Like, I think that's kind of special. Anyway, so yeah, Dalinar has a thing for this girl, for this gal, for this lady, for this queen, I suppose. We know that he is still still reading from this book. I believe the book is called The Way of Kings, the book that his brother kind of left behind for him, and he's getting his brother's widow to like read him passages from this book, which, you know, interesting choices. He has also at this point decided that he is no longer going to be a high prince, I believe is what his title is. He doesn't feel like he can be a very good advisor to his nephew, and he feels like these visions are making him mad, making him crazy, and that he's not really going to be able to like fulfill the role in the way that he is supposed to. And really, I just think people around him are gaslighting him. I know these visions are weird, but also like they're trying to say that like his judgment and or his choices are sketchy or like not good or are not for the good of the country, and it's actually not true. Like he definitely has everyone's best interests at heart. So anyway, Dalinar is interesting. What I am struck by most though, first off, glad Shallan is getting more parts in this book, or more chapters in this part, because we lost Shallan for a second and I was a little bit like, okay, where's my girl? Shallan at this point is still under the tutelage of Yasna, and we find out her true intentions and ambitions here. She's not just trying to become a marriageable prospect, she's trying to steal Yasna's soulcaster, which at this point I feel like we don't really know what soulcasters are and what soulcasting is per se, but I did look it up, and it is one of a few different powers or whatever in the Cosmere. I don't know. I don't really know the details. Like, I'm gonna be honest, the magic's kind of confusing to me, but hopefully we'll find out more about that as time goes on. But the family soulcaster is no longer in commish young Shallan, and so she's going to try to steal Yasna's. Like, this whole thing has been a ruse so she can just like be a thief. So that's a choice, definitely a choice there, girl. I'm assuming that's gonna come back to bite her. That's kind of all we've gotten from her point of view since we last spoke. The thing that is striking me the most about this part of the book and or this book in general is how impressive the storytelling is. There are multiple moments where we are understanding more of the world and world building through other characters, right? Like, I don't read a ton of fantasy, but when I do, I'm often unimpressed by the amount of info dumping in stories and how authors just kind of throw things at us and expect us to absorb everything. And I will say, obviously, like Brandon Sanderson, his worlds are so complex that at times you do feel like a lot of stuff is being thrown at you at once. But I just am so impressed by the way that he has certain characters present us to certain tidbits of information. In the interludes, we get to know Szeth as a character. Szeth is the person that assassinates the old king. We get to learn more about the culture of the Alethi people through his eyes. Instead of just getting told from Alethi characters like what they're like, we get to see it through an outsider's point of view. And so we get to kind of see like the prejudices, I guess, that different people have towards other people. That's a more like straightforward point of view. But we also, for instance, have Shallan, and in her studies, she is learning more about what exactly happened to the king, the assassinated king, theories on why the Parshendi people would maybe want to kill the king. This is information, again, that could have been like thrown at us in other ways, but I think the way in which it's being told to us is just more impressive. And these are just two small examples, but I am noticing time and again that I feel like things are revealed to us in interesting ways, and things that kind of annoyed me initially, I guess, are, irritating me less now. I was initially a little bit irritated that we kept getting flashbacks in Kaladin's chapters because I couldn't discern easily what was a flashback and what was in the present day. And while that is a little bit irritating as an audiobook listener, I can appreciate the way that we are getting Kaladin's past kind of told to us over time as the present is unfolding. And I think those storylines are actually going to kind of converge in a way. I could be wrong here, but I just feel like it was irritating me at first, I guess, for sure, but now I am much less irritated by it. I am just definitely impressed by Brandon Sanderson's writing and the way that he crafts his stories. So having a good time with it. I am very interested to see, I guess, what happened to Kaladin to the place that he's at now. Obviously, we know he's enslaved, and I thought initially, like, oh, maybe I missed what happened, and I think, again, I kind of spoiled myself here, that in these flashbacks we're going to be revealed like what exactly happened. I think it's clever the way that things are being done. So anyway, I'm still just really enjoying this book. There's really nothing that is standing out to me as something that I don't like. Obviously, I think this story, obviously the story could have been shorter or there's nothing really that I would change. I think the length of the story makes sense given what we're learning. I don't feel like we're spending too long in any one point of view. I don't feel like I'm getting bored when listening at all. There's nothing not to like here. Like, I'm having a good time with it. I think your enjoyment of the story is definitely going to be very much dependent on what kind of fantasy reader you are and what kinds of writing you like. If you do not like Brandon Sanderson's writing and his style of character work, I think like this is not going to be the right book for you, but I do think in general he does do a really good job at balancing plot with character. I don't think you're going to be upset if you are one kind of reader versus the other. Maybe if you're plot driven, this is going to be a little slow for you, but just overall, like. So I'm going to continue reading. If I have updates at 70%, I will try to give them to you. Otherwise, I'll let you know my final thoughts when I'm done, but like, this is a 5-star read, come on. I don't know that I've ever been prouder of myself than I am in this moment. I have finished Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, and I don't even know what to say. Like, this book was truly impressive. It is absolutely, without a doubt, a 5-star read. Though I was getting a little bit bored, I will say, before like the last hour of the audiobook, there's just nothing that I take major fault with within this story. I really liked how Kaladin's story shaped up at the end of this book. It was really nice seeing him finally get out of, you know, the bonds of slavery. It was really nice to see Dalinar live out his principles and live out his truth. I feel like for too long he was operating in the way that he felt like he had to, given who the current king is and just given how his society has run for so long. But getting to see him basically give up his shard blade to free a bunch of enslaved people, it was really cool to see, and I'm really excited to see what the relationship between Dalinar and Kaladin looks like going forward. Also getting to see Shallan and Yasna like come together, admit, I guess, to the fact that they're like both soulcasters, and to get to see what their relationship is going to be like in the future, I'm very, very excited about. I've never really read a story that has apprentice and master sort of like relationship, and so it'll be interesting to see that kind of unfold in hopefully the next books. And then there's that whole like sequence of events that happens at the end of the book with Dalinar getting this vision of the fact that like God is dead and that the darkness is coming, and that like they have never defeated the darkness, and the darkness is like it's coming after them. And then that like epilogue, which, you know, sort of like further confirms that like the darkness is here, like we're gonna have to fight some stuff. I don't know. I am very excited. Very ominous, like it's a very ominous way to end a book, but there's just clearly been so much thought put into the story that I'm so excited to dive deeper into the world. Like it was so good. I don't feel like I wasted 2 days of my life. If anything, I just felt so encapsulated and like entrenched in this world, and I'm very excited to read the next books. In fact, I will probably do that over the next couple of days. In the next couple of days, not over the next couple of days, but I think in my next weekly reading vlog, I'll probably read Words of Radiance if you want to maybe tune in for that. No promises, but I think if I leave too much time between these books, I will absolutely forget things. Though the internet is a wealth of information about this series, and anytime I had questions, it was really nice to be able to go on like the wiki for the series and get to flesh out some of those like questions I had. So I had a great time. Okay, overall I had a great time. Now we can talk about my final thoughts though on this video and just like how I'm feeling about what I read. I think what I'm figuring out is that I am more than capable of reading long books and more than capable of reading adult fantasy. I think this was like the ultimate test of that for me, and I knew that I could read adult fantasy technically. It's just something I always put off. So I'm like, you know, do I really like adult fantasy? I think this video has confirmed for me that I do indeed enjoy fantasy, and long books in general are not something that I should like put to the wayside. If anything, this kind of like renewed my youth in a way. I feel like when I was younger, all I read was fantasy. It was YA fantasy at the time, but I loved long series. I loved getting to read really long books, but I feel like the longer I've been on YouTube, the more that I avoid those kinds of books simply because it makes, in my opinion, for like less interesting content. And, you know, if I read at a higher volume, I can typically recommend more books, so I avoid the longer ones. But this video, I think, kind of affirmed that I should read the books that I own for sure, and that if I am interested in a fantasy book, even if it's long, I should just go for it. I think in 2023, I'm gonna make one of my goals just to like genuinely read the things that I want and not think so much about like the peripherals, you know? It doesn't matter if I'm reading like, you know, 15 romances in a week to be able to recommend to people. If I'm reading one book a week that I really, really enjoy, that's like maybe a little bit more important. So anyway, I had fun with this video. Obviously, some of these books worked better for me than others, but in general, this was a really fun experience, and I feel like the world is kind of open for me. The world's my oyster now, and I get to read more adult fantasy and talk about it with my husband, who's directly above me. I think he is really looking forward to that as well. He keeps hounding me and hassling me to read the Stormlight Archive series, so now that I have read the first book, you know, off to the races, and we can have like stuff to chat about. So thanks so much for watching this video. If you need any fantasy recommendations, obviously like I enjoyed The Name of the Wind and The Way of Kings. Everything else is just kind of like meh for me. If you really want to see the origins of Dark Academia, I guess read The Secret History, but I think we all kind of know my feelings about all of these books at this point. I don't need to belabor the point. Thanks so much for watching. I love y'all so much, and until next time.